Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this is going to be a quick video where we're going to talk about fetching data using promises and async await. So basically what happened is that once upon a time, to do asynchronous events, you would have to use callbacks. So basically you would pass a function as a function, and then within the function, it would call the function once the asynchronous action was complete. So everything was a callback to the next thing, to the next thing, the next thing. And it created what was called callback hell. Okay, so like, just so you can imagine what I mean, imagine this. Okay, you do a function that has a callback in it. So you're basically inserting a function. And then inside there, maybe there's another callback. Or you call some other function. So here's like func2, my second asynchronous function of some sort. And then that one also takes a callback. So then we do this. And then, and there I have to call another asynchronous function. That takes a callback. So I put in another arrow function. And you see it creates this kind of like pyramid structure, and this is referred to as callback hell. Okay? People hated this. I hate this. This is stupid. Okay? So what happened was they came out with they added to JavaScript something called promises. So promises is kind of, it's like a weird, unique object that can be, that gets passed, and when there's a function that returns a promise, it basically tells JavaScript, wait, I mean, this, we don't have what we need right now, continue forward. So and the fetch return this function here that's built into JavaScript. Okay, it's technically built into the browser API. So you can use fetch natively in JavaScript that runs in the browser. If you want to run JavaScript in Node, it does not natively or automatically know about fetch. So you'd actually have to like bring in fetch, which if that's the case, you might as well then bring in Axios, which makes life even a little easier. But that's the story so far. So essentially what happens is that now, if you're not familiar with fetch, what fetch does is that it takes a parameter. It takes a couple parameters, but if you just put in one parameter, which is the URL, which I have a URL here for for what's called a headless CMS. A headless CMS is essentially a content management system that has no front-end website. Particularly, I'm using Contentful. So I had this blog that I created through Contentful. It has no front end. So if you want to see my blog, I have to create a front end, which I've done with React, Vue, Angular. It's just sort of the way it's the thing I've used to help me learn those things by having this blog that I just keep rebuilding with different frameworks. So this feed just represents that blog. So I'm saying, hey, fetch me my, the stuff that this API URL gives me. And basically what happens at the moment you run that, it might take like a couple milliseconds or more, maybe take you a few seconds for that information to come back. So what fetch does, instead of stopping your whole website from doing anything else and stopping the whole code, it returns a promise. It says, hey, JavaScript, keep going, okay? Just keep doing other stuff. And then, come check in with me later, because I might have that thing I promised you. So this is why, like, if you run code outside of the fetch, like if I put it, like if I were to console log here, so you'll see why I put this in there in a second, console.log blog1. Okay, this is gonna work funny. Okay, so what's happening here? So when I do fetch, it's gonna return a promise. So then what if I want to make sure that something happens when that information comes back? Then I need a .then. So .then links in, and then in .then you put in a callback or a function. So basically what this is saying is, hey, fetch the stuff from this URL. When it comes back, then do this. And since this is an arrow function, this is the parameter, so you can call it whatever you want, but I'm going to call it resp, short for response. So whatever the response is from that promise, I want to turn it into JSON. So I do response.json. Now, since this is a dot then, it's treated as another promise. So when this completes, I'm saying, hey, dot then. So when this one completes, so this is the first promise, this is the second promise that won't happen until this is done, and this is the third promise. So basically this is saying, hey, when this is done, take the result of that, the resulting information we got from this, and we're going to call that JSON. Again, it's just a parameter. You can call it whatever you want. And then I can do stuff with it. So since here I'm doing a couple more things, I did end up putting the curly bracket there so I can do more things. So what I did is I created a variable called blog1, which I actually created up here. Okay, and then I assigned, there's an array in this. I just know that because I've used this quite a few times. There's an array in that response called items, and that's really where all my posts are. So I'm assigning that to blog1. So I'm doing that here. And then here I console log blog1. So we can see that blog1 is what it's worth at that point. But notice that's still inside the dot then. Why? Because this won't happen until this happens, which won't happen until this happens. So in that case, blog1 will actually have information in time. This happens outside of the dot then. So technically what will happen is that all these promises will wait. So it'll just skip and do this console log. But since these things haven't completed yet, because the promise hasn't resolved, this is going to console log out an empty array. Because blog1 is still going to be empty, because this technically hasn't happened yet until it gets a response. But the promise says, hey, go ahead, move forward. Okay? But you can see how the dot thens aren't the cleanest way of looking at that. It's just like, it's not the most logical thing in the world. Better than the callback hell, but still not perfect. Okay, so let me actually run this so you can see those console logs. I'm going to just comment this out for a second. Actually, let me comment this whole thing out for a second. So let's save that. Let's go open this up. I think I got it actually right over here. Open with Google Chrome. So waiting for that to open up. So that's going to, oh, that's right, I have to show, it's all in the console. So we're going to run inspect. Now if I go to console, you'll see that the first thing that prints out is empty, because, and that's technically this console log. Because it skipped this, because it's waiting, because it said, it gave it a promise. It says, hey, I'll promise to give you the stuff later. It skips it, and then runs this console log. Okay. And then afterwards, it runs the console log that was in the .then, because that happened after the stuff actually got returned from the promise. Cool. So that's essentially how it works. So if generally, if you're doing all this stuff with API calls and your array and you console log your variables and they come out empty or they don't come out the way you expect them to, it's oftentimes because your code's not running in the order that you think it is. Cool. And now let's show you how it would look like with async await. So basically, it's the same idea, except with async await, you need to run it in an asynchronous function. So the basic idea is, I would create a new function, so const myFetch, and I'm going to tell JavaScript that, hey, this function is asynchronous. So there's going to be a bunch of promise stuff in here. And the benefit of this syntax, it just looks nicer. It looks nicer. It's easier to kind of think through. So basically what I'm saying is that, hey, JavaScript, this particular function, everything in here, think of it as asynchronous. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to have a variable named response. What I want response to have is the result of me fetching this URL. So I'm going to tell JavaScript, okay, in this async function, I want you to wait till this promise resolves. Once this promise resolves, assign the result to this variable called response. Cool. So then basically, this function stops until this gets done. It won't go further into the function. And instead of me having to do a .then chain, I can just go on to the next line and say, hey, I have a variable named JSON, and I want it to be worth this. But again, since this hinges on this, I want it to wait. So I go, hey, await, response being turned into JSON. Okay, so basically, since it's waiting for this, which is waiting for this, it's going to wait. So once this resolves, it'll assign the result to JSON. So it's essentially the same thing as the .then we're doing with the .then. Again, it just looks cleaner. I'm not doing all these arrow functions. Then after that, I have the information, so I console log it, and I'll return the value if I want to. Okay, so again, await will literally shut down that function. That function will not move forward until that promise resolves. And this way you have a much kind of cleaner looking thing in your function. So you would just create a function that, and then do what you need to do in the function, and just use your async and await keywords. So then here, I say, hey, my variable blog2 is going to equal what the myFetch function returns, which is json.items. And then I'll console log blog2. Now what you'll notice, this console log is not asynchronous. So what's going to happen is that this function is going to run, it's going to notice a promise right away because it's an asynchronous function, and it's just going to move on because that's how asynchronous code works. As soon as it notices that this is an asynchronous thing, it's going to be like, oh, okay, this is not going to be finished right now, so let me move forward. So it's going to just jump to the next line, console log this before block2 actually is worth anything. It's actually going to probably come up as undefined. So let's go back, take a look, see what we get. So refresh, and you see the first one, and again you can see over here that's the console log that's at the end of line 23, and see we just get back a promise because it still hasn't completed yet. But the console log in the function is completed because, again, all those awaits make it wait. So that's the difference. Okay, so if you wanted, you can do your fetches of API information either this way or that way. This way looks pretty. You got to make sure that you're only using a wait inside an asynchronous function. So for example, in React, if you use the use effect hook, if you want to use async await, you have to define another function within the use state callback, which then it's doable. Just, you know, you might, at that point you might as well just use the .then. But React will tell you in the errors when that's the case. Cool. So that's async and await versus .then. I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a great one.